the 120-pound college graduate from Phoenix, should have quit on day 3. Everyone expected her to. Emma Rodriguez had already endured 48 hours of sleep deprivation, survived the grueling physical assessment that eliminated 30% of the initial candidates, and somehow managed to complete the obstacle course that left grown men twice her size gasping for air. Yet here she stood at 0530 hours, muddy boots planted firmly in the Georgia clay, while Sergeant First Class David Carter delivered his morning address to the remaining 105 candidates of Ranger School Class 15 to 24. The pre-dawn mist clung to the pine trees surrounding Fort Benning's training grounds as Carter's voice cut through the humid air like a blade. His weathered face bore the scars of multiple combat deployments, and his reputation for breaking candidates was legendary throughout the base. Most instructors wanted students to succeed eventually, but Carter seemed to take personal satisfaction in watching dreams shatter against the unforgiving reality of elite military training. Emma kept her eyes forward, maintaining the rigid posture required during formation, while internally cataloging every detail around her. The other candidates stood in perfect rows, their identical woodland camouflage uniforms creating a sea of green and brown. Some faces showed the hollow exhaustion that came with extreme physical demands. Others displayed the grim determination of warriors pushing through pain. A few wore expressions of barely concealed doubt, mental cracks beginning to form under pressure that would only intensify in the coming weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez had never intended to become the subject of betting pools among Ranger instructors. She had arrived at Fort Benning 3 weeks earlier with a simple goal to earn the coveted Ranger tab that would validate her place in the military's elite ranks. What she hadn't anticipated was becoming the walking contradiction that challenged every assumption about what a successful Ranger candidate should look like. The daughter of a high school mathematics teacher and a small business owner, Emma had grown up in Phoenix's suburban sprawl where her biggest physical challenges involved hiking desert trails and competing on her high school's cross-country team. Her path to Ranger School had been unconventional, beginning with an Army ROTC scholarship that paid for her mechanical engineering degree at Arizona State University. While her classmates focused on internships at tech companies, Emma spent summers at military leadership camps, gradually building the foundation that would eventually lead her to this moment. Her commissioning as a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers had been unremarkable by military standards. Average height, slender build, quiet demeanor that suggested competence rather than commanding presence. Her initial assignment to Fort Leonard Wood had involved overseeing construction projects and managing logistics for training facilities, work that required technical precision but rarely demanded the extreme physical capabilities associated with special operations forces. The decision to apply for Ranger School had surprised her commanding officers and worried her family. The program's reputation for breaking even the most physically gifted soldiers was well established. Statistics showed that roughly 60% of candidates failed to complete the course, with many washing out during the first phase due to injuries, exhaustion, or simple inability to meet the relentless physical demands. Emma's application had generated considerable discussion among the selection board. Her academic credentials were exemplary, her leadership evaluations consistently rated her as exceptional, and her physical fitness scores met all requirements. However, the intangible factors that often determine success in extreme training environments remained questionable. Could someone who looked like she belonged in a college lecture hall survive the psychological and physical crucible designed to forge elite warriors? The pre-Ranger course at Fort Moore had provided her first taste of what lay ahead. 3 weeks of intensive preparation designed to ensure candidates arrived at the actual school with baseline fitness and basic tactical knowledge. Emma had struggled initially with the heavier equipment loads and longer ruck marches, her smaller frame working harder to cover the same distances as her male counterparts. But she had adapted with the methodical persistence that characterized her approach to every challenge. Her fellow candidates in the pre-course had treated her with polite professionalism tinged with skepticism. Most were infantry officers or enlisted soldiers from combat arms specialties, men whose entire military careers had been built around physical prowess and aggressive leadership. Emma represented something different, an outsider whose presence suggested either remarkable determination or dangerous naivete. Connor Mitchell had been the most vocal in expressing doubts about her chances. The former college football player turned infantry officer possessed the physical attributes that most people associated with special operations success. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with the broad shoulders and powerful build that came from years of serious weight training, Connor moved through physical challenges with an ease that made them appear deceptively simple. His confidence bordered on arrogance, but his capabilities seemed to justify his self-assurance. During one particularly challenging ruck march, Connor had jogged alongside Emma as she struggled to maintain pace with a 70-pound pack across rolling terrain in oppressive humidity. His breathing remained steady while she fought to control her respiratory rate, sweat streaming down her face despite the early morning hour. "You know there's no shame in recognizing when something's beyond your capabilities," he had said, his tone suggesting helpful concern rather than malicious intent. Ranger School isn't about proving points or breaking barriers. It's about preparing leaders for the worst possible combat situations. Sometimes the most courageous thing is knowing when to step aside. Emma had maintained her pace without responding, channeling her energy into forward movement rather than verbal sparring. She understood Connor's perspective, even if she disagreed with his conclusion. The military's elite units had historically been dominated by men who fit specific physical profiles, and her presence represented a deviation from established patterns. Questioning her suitability wasn't necessarily prejudice. It could be legitimate concern about unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. But Emma also knew something that Connor and others couldn't see from external observation. Her smaller frame meant different biomechanics, not inferior ones. Years of distance running had taught her body to function efficiently under sustained stress, converting limited physical resources into steady, reliable performance. Where larger candidates might rely on raw strength to overcome obstacles, she had developed techniques that emphasized leverage, timing, and endurance. The final week of pre-Ranger training had included a comprehensive evaluation designed to identify candidates likely to struggle in the main course. Physical assessments, psychological interviews, and practical exercises that simulated the extreme conditions they would face at Fort Benning. Emma had performed adequately in most areas, excelling in problem-solving scenarios while showing expected weaknesses in events requiring maximum strength. Her interview with the course cadre had been particularly revealing. Major Patricia Williams, a career military intelligence officer who served as the pre-course director, had reviewed Emma's file with obvious interest. The questions had gone beyond standard inquiries about motivation and preparation, probing deeper into her understanding of what she was attempting to accomplish. "Your scores indicate you'll meet the minimum standards for most physical requirements," Major Williams had noted, studying her evaluation results. "The question isn't whether you can complete individual tasks, but whether you can maintain performance when cumulative stress reaches levels that break down normal decision-making processes." Emma had considered her response carefully, recognizing that honesty would serve her better than false bravado. "I understand that my physical profile creates additional challenges, ma'am. But I also know that my engineering background has taught me to find solutions when conventional approaches don't work. I'm not trying to prove that anyone can do this. I'm trying to prove that I can do this." Major Williams had nodded approvingly at the distinction. Too many candidates arrived with idealistic notions about overcoming impossible odds through determination alone. The reality of special operations training required more nuanced understanding of personal limitations and creative problem-solving within those constraints. The bus ride from Fort Moore to Fort Benning had been largely silent, 43 candidates lost in private thoughts about what lay ahead. Emma had used the time to review her training notes, reinforcing the technical knowledge that would supplement her physical preparation. Ranger School wasn't just about enduring hardship. It required mastery of complex tactical concepts, leadership under extreme stress, and decision-making when exhaustion impaired normal cognitive function. Her first glimpse of the Ranger Training Brigade facilities had been sobering. The compound sprawled across several hundred acres of Georgia pine forest, its utilitarian buildings and obstacle courses designed with brutal functionality rather than aesthetic appeal. Everything about the environment suggested serious purpose, from the razor wire surrounding perimeter fences to the worn paths between training areas marked by countless boots over decades of instruction. Processing had been intentionally humiliating, designed to strip away civilian identity and establish the psychological foundation for military transformation. Emma had stood in formation while instructors cataloged personal items, confiscated anything deemed unnecessary for training, and issued the basic equipment that would become extensions of her body for the next several weeks. The initial physical assessment had eliminated 12 candidates immediately, men whose confidence exceeded their actual capabilities when measured against objective standards. Emma had watched them depart with mixed emotions, understanding that their failure created marginally better odds for her own success, while recognizing that anyone eliminated this early had probably underestimated the challenge significantly. Her first night in the barracks had been surreal. Sleeping in close quarters with 40 other candidates, listening to the sounds of exhausted breathing and occasional nightmares, Emma had felt the full weight of what she had committed to accomplish. This wasn't a college course where effort and good intentions could compensate for limitations. This was systematic evaluation under conditions designed to reveal exactly what each person was capable of when everything comfortable and familiar had been stripped away. Sergeant First Class David Carter had introduced himself to the class the following morning with a speech that left no doubt about his expectations and methods. Standing before them in perfectly pressed uniform, his chest decorated with combat ribbons that spoke of extensive operational experience, Carter embodied everything the military valued in its most elite personnel. "Look around you," he had commanded, his voice carrying easily across the formation without apparent effort. 43 candidates entered this program thinking they understood what it means to be pushed beyond normal human limitations. By the end of this week, at least 10 of you will have discovered that understanding and experiencing are completely different things. His gaze had moved methodically across the formation, making brief eye contact with each candidate as if conducting individual assessments. When his attention reached Emma, she had felt the weight of particular scrutiny, sensing that her presence represented something he viewed with professional skepticism. "This program has maintained its standards for over 70 years," Carter had continued, his tone suggesting pride in institutional tradition. "Every Ranger tab has been earned through identical suffering, identical standards, identical commitment to excellence. We don't modify requirements to accommodate different backgrounds or capabilities. You either meet the standard or you don't." The message had been clear without being explicitly stated. Emma's gender, size, and non-combat background made her an anomaly, whose presence tested the program's commitment to maintaining historical standards. She would receive no special consideration, no allowances for different physical capabilities, no recognition that her path to this point had been different from her male counterparts. Emma had accepted this understanding without resentment, recognizing it as the necessary foundation for legitimate achievement. If she earned the Ranger tab, it would carry meaning only because the standards remained unchanged. Lowering requirements to enable her success would diminish the accomplishment for everyone who had earned it through traditional means. The first week had been a deliberate exercise in sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion designed to establish baseline stress levels that would persist throughout the course. Candidates were awakened at random intervals for equipment inspections, physical training, and tactical exercises that seemed designed more to exhaust than educate. The point wasn't to teach specific skills immediately, but to create the mental and physical fatigue that would serve as the backdrop for all subsequent learning. Emma had struggled with some aspects of this initial phase while excelling in others. Her smaller frame made certain equipment-heavy exercises more challenging, but her engineering background helped her excel in problem-solving scenarios that left other candidates confused. More importantly, she had begun to develop the mental resilience that would prove crucial in later phases. During one particularly brutal night exercise, the candidates had been divided into small teams and tasked with navigating through dense forest to locate specific objectives while carrying full equipment loads. The terrain was deliberately challenging, featuring steep ravines, thick underbrush, and stream crossings that soaked boots and equipment. Most teams had struggled with navigation in complete darkness, becoming lost and frustrated as exhaustion impaired their decision-making abilities. Emma had found herself paired with Jake Thompson, a soft-spoken infantry sergeant from Montana whose quiet competence had earned respect among the other candidates. Jake was built for endurance rather than raw power, his lean frame and steady temperament, making him an ideal partner for challenging navigation exercises. Together they had moved through the forest with methodical precision, using compass bearings and terrain association to maintain accurate course, despite the difficult conditions. When they encountered other teams that had become disoriented, Emma had suggested pooling navigation resources rather than competing for individual advancement. Her proposal had been initially met with suspicion, Ranger School emphasized individual accountability and discouraged cooperative problem-solving in many contexts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But Jake had supported her reasoning, pointing out that real combat situations required leaders who could coordinate multiple elements effectively. The combined team had successfully located all objectives within the time limit, an achievement that stood out among generally poor performance across the class. More significantly, Emma had demonstrated practical leadership under stress, making decisions that benefited the group while maintaining individual accountability for her own performance. Sergeant Carter had noted their success with characteristic brevity, neither praising nor criticizing their approach, but marking it in whatever mental catalog he maintained about each candidate's capabilities and potential. Emma had sensed that her unconventional problem-solving methods had registered with him, though whether as positive or negative remained unclear. The physical training regimen had been relentless, designed to push every candidate beyond their perceived limitations, while identifying those who lacked the fundamental resilience required for advanced phases. Daily sessions included obstacle courses, ruck marches, combat exercises, and endurance challenges that left even the most physically gifted candidates questioning their capabilities. Emma had approached these challenges with systematic analysis, studying techniques used by successful candidates and adapting them to her own physical constraints. Where others relied on brute force to overcome obstacles, she developed methods that emphasized momentum, leverage, and efficient movement. Her times weren't always the fastest, but they were consistently reliable, and she rarely failed to complete required tasks within established standards. Connor Mitchell had watched her adaptations with growing irritation, apparently viewing her success as somehow diminishing his own achievements. During one particularly challenging obstacle course, he had positioned himself directly behind her, offering running commentary on her technique that bordered on harassment. "That's not how you're supposed to do the rope climb," he had called out as Emma used a modified technique that compensated for her smaller grip strength. "You're supposed to use proper form, not find ways around the standard." Emma had continued climbing without responding, focusing her energy on maintaining steady progress toward the top of the 30-foot rope. Her technique was different but equally effective, and criticism from another candidate wasn't something she needed to address while hanging 20 feet above the ground. Jake Thompson had been more direct in his response to Connor's comments. "She's reaching the same objective using different methods," he had pointed out calmly. "That's what good leaders do when standard approaches don't fit the situation." The exchange had highlighted growing tensions within the class as physical and mental stress began to reveal personality traits that might have remained hidden under normal circumstances. Some candidates became more supportive of their peers, recognizing that everyone's success contributed to overall unit cohesion. Others became increasingly competitive and critical, viewing the struggles of fellow candidates as opportunities for relative advancement. Emma had filed these observations away for future reference, understanding that leadership in extreme situations required ability to work with people displaying their worst characteristics as well as their best. The artificial stress of Ranger School was producing authentic insights into how different personality types responded to pressure, knowledge that would prove valuable in real leadership positions. As the first week concluded, the class had already lost 6 candidates to injuries, voluntary withdrawal, and failure to meet standards. The remaining 37 faced increasingly complex challenges designed to test not just individual capabilities but their ability to function as leaders responsible for others' performance and safety. Emma had survived the initial elimination phase, but she understood that her real test was just beginning. The physical demands would continue escalating, but more importantly, she would face leadership positions where her decisions directly affected other candidates' success or failure. This was where many otherwise capable people discovered that meeting standards themselves was different from helping others meet those same standards under extreme conditions. Her equipment had been thoroughly tested by constant use, and she had learned to maintain and modify gear to compensate for the different stresses her smaller frame placed on standard issue items. Her boots had been broken in through hundreds of miles of marching on various terrain, her pack had been adjusted to distribute weight more efficiently across her shoulders and hips, and her weapons had been zeroed and re-zeroed until she could engage targets accurately despite fatigue that made her hands shake. More importantly, Emma had begun to understand the psychological dimensions of the challenge she faced. Ranger School wasn't designed to break people through impossible physical demands, though those were certainly present. It was designed to strip away normal coping mechanisms and social supports, creating conditions where individuals had to discover their fundamental character when everything else had been removed. For Emma, this process had been particularly intense because she had started from a position of external skepticism about her chances. Every small success had to overcome not just the objective challenge, but also the assumption that her eventual failure was predetermined. This double burden had forced her to develop mental resilience beyond what might have been required for candidates whose presence was considered more natural. The barracks conversations during brief rest periods had revealed the different ways candidates processed the ongoing stress. Some focused on immediate challenges, dealing with each day's requirements without thinking beyond the next 24 hours. Others obsessed over future phases, worrying about obstacles they hadn't yet encountered. A few had begun showing signs of depression or anxiety that suggested they were struggling with more than just physical demands. Emma had found herself becoming an unofficial counselor for several candidates who seemed to need someone to talk through their fears and doubts. Her engineering background had taught her to break complex problems into manageable components, a skill that translated well to helping others develop coping strategies for seemingly overwhelming challenges. Jake Thompson had been particularly appreciative of these conversations, revealing that his quiet demeanor concealed significant anxiety about his ability to meet leadership expectations in later phases. Despite his obvious competence in tactical situations, he worried that his introverted personality would prevent him from projecting the commanding presence that many people associated with effective military leadership. "I can do the physical stuff," he had confided during one late-night discussion. "But when they put me in charge of a patrol or mission, I freeze up. I know what needs to be done, but I can't seem to communicate it in a way that gets people moving." Emma had listened carefully, recognizing that Jake's concerns reflected common misconceptions about leadership styles in high-stress environments. "Leadership isn't about having the loudest voice or the most commanding presence," she had pointed out. "It's about making good decisions and helping other people execute them effectively. You've been doing that naturally since we got here." These conversations had helped Emma understand that her own challenges, while significant, were part of a broader pattern of self-doubt that affected even the most capable candidates. Everyone was struggling with something, whether physical limitations, psychological stress, or uncertainty about their fundamental suitability for elite military service. As they prepared for the second week of training, Emma reflected on how much her understanding of the program had evolved since arriving at Fort Benning. She had expected a straightforward test of physical endurance and mental toughness, but the reality was far more complex. Ranger School was revealing itself as a comprehensive evaluation of leadership potential under the kind of extreme conditions that separated theoretical knowledge from practical capability. The morning formation for Week 2 had been notably smaller, with several more candidates having been eliminated overnight due to injuries sustained during the previous day's training. Emma stood in her assigned position, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders from her equipment harness and the deep fatigue that had become her constant companion. Sergeant Carter surveyed the reduced formation with satisfaction, apparently pleased that the selection process was proceeding according to his expectations. His briefing for the coming week promised escalating challenges designed to test leadership abilities under increasingly realistic combat conditions. "This week we transition from individual survival to team leadership," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen these challenges break countless candidates over the years. "You'll rotate through positions of responsibility where your decisions determine not just your own success, but the success or failure of your entire team." Emma felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety as she contemplated the leadership evaluations ahead. This was where her unconventional background might prove either advantageous or catastrophic, depending on her ability to translate engineering problem-solving skills into effective military leadership under extreme stress. The story of how a 120-pound college graduate would eventually carry her teammate 12 miles to save his life was about to begin in earnest, though none of the participants could have imagined the events that would transform Emma Rodriguez from an unlikely candidate into a symbol of what was possible when determination met opportunity under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The Ranger Training Brigade at Fort Benning operated under protocols that had been refined through decades of producing America's most elite military leaders. Every aspect of the program reflected hard-learned lessons from combat operations spanning multiple conflicts, where the difference between competent and exceptional leadership often meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The sprawling complex of training facilities represented more than just physical infrastructure. It embodied a philosophy that authentic leadership could only be forged under conditions that stripped away every comfort and revealed the essential character underneath. Emma discovered this reality during her first leadership evaluation, conducted in the dense pine forests surrounding the main training compound. The exercise began at 0200 hours with a mission briefing that deliberately contained contradictory information and impossible timelines, designed to test how candidates responded when standard procedures provided no clear guidance. She found herself appointed as patrol leader for a 7-person team tasked with conducting reconnaissance on a simulated enemy position while avoiding detection by opposing forces played by advanced students from previous classes. The team included Jake Thompson, whose steady demeanor had become a source of stability for many struggling candidates, Connor Mitchell, whose physical capabilities remained impressive despite his growing frustration with Emma's continued presence, and 4 other candidates whose capabilities ranged from exceptional to barely adequate. Emma understood immediately that success would require maximizing each person's strengths while compensating for their limitations, a complex leadership challenge that went far beyond simple tactical execution. The terrain they needed to cross consisted of heavily wooded ridgelines, broken by steep ravines and dense undergrowth that limited visibility to mere yards in many areas. Creek beds provided natural avenues of approach but also channeled movement into predictable patterns that sophisticated opponents would monitor. The mission required reaching an observation point 3 miles distant, gathering specific intelligence about defensive positions, and returning without being detected by roving patrols that knew the area intimately. Emma began by conducting individual assessments of her team members, identifying not just their obvious capabilities, but also subtle strengths that might prove crucial under pressure. Jake's navigation skills were exceptional, honed through years of hunting in Montana wilderness, but he lacked confidence in his ability to make tactical decisions under fire. Connor possessed outstanding physical conditioning and natural aggression that would be valuable in direct confrontation, but his impatience with detailed planning sometimes led to careless mistakes that compromised operational security. Private Martinez brought expertise in radio communications and electronic surveillance, skills that would be essential for gathering intelligence without revealing their position. Sergeant Williams had served as a vehicle mechanic before transitioning to infantry, giving him practical knowledge about military equipment that could help identify key targets during reconnaissance. The other team members possessed solid basic skills, but no particular specializations that distinguished them from typical infantry soldiers. Rather than imposing a rigid command structure that might stifle individual initiative, Emma designed a leadership approach that distributed decision-making authority based on each person's areas of expertise. Jake would handle navigation and route planning, Connor would serve as point man during movement phases, Martinez would manage communications and technical intelligence gathering, and Williams would analyze equipment and defensive positions they observed. This collaborative method contradicted the traditional military preference for clear hierarchical authority, but Emma recognized that their mission's complexity required leveraging specialized knowledge that no single person possessed. Her role became coordination and final decision-making rather than detailed micromanagement of every action. The initial movement phase proceeded smoothly, with Jake's route selection avoiding obvious danger areas while maintaining progress toward their objective. The team moved in carefully spaced formation that balanced security against the need for mutual support if they encountered opposition. Emma monitored their progress while watching for signs that individual stress levels were affecting performance, understanding that leadership under extreme conditions required constant attention to human factors as well as tactical considerations. Connor's natural pointman instincts proved valuable as they approached more dangerous terrain near their objective. His ability to detect subtle signs of human presence allowed the team to avoid 2 separate patrol routes that would have compromised their mission. However, his growing impatience with the deliberate pace required for maintaining stealth began creating tension that threatened team cohesion. "We're moving too slowly," he whispered during a rest halt approximately halfway to their target. "At this rate, we'll reach the observation point with barely enough time to gather intelligence before the return deadline." Emma considered his concern carefully, recognizing valid points about time management while understanding that hasty movement in dangerous terrain often led to detection or injury. "Our primary mission is gathering intelligence without compromise," she responded quietly. "Speed that results in detection fails the overall objective." Connor's expression revealed frustration with what he perceived as overly cautious leadership, but he accepted her decision without further argument. Emma noted the exchange as an example of the personality conflicts that emerged when competent people operated under stress with different risk tolerances and leadership philosophies. The observation phase proved more challenging than anticipated. Their target area contained a sophisticated defensive network that included concealed positions, electronic surveillance equipment, and mobile patrols operating on irregular schedules. Gathering the required intelligence would necessitate extended observation from multiple vantage points, significantly increasing their exposure time and detection risk. Emma divided the team into two-person observation posts, positioned to provide overlapping coverage of the target area, while maintaining communication through hand signals and brief radio transmissions. She paired Connor with Williams, hoping that Williams' technical expertise would channel Connor's aggressive tendencies into productive analysis rather than impatient action. Jake and Martinez formed the second observation team, combining navigation skills with communications expertise. She retained direct control of the remaining team member, Corporal Davis, while positioning herself to coordinate between observation posts and make decisions about information-gathering priorities. This arrangement distributed risk, while ensuring she maintained overall situational awareness necessary for effective command decisions. The intelligence-gathering phase revealed the sophisticated nature of the defensive network they were evaluating. The simulated enemy force had constructed positions that demonstrated advanced understanding of terrain utilization, fields of fire, and mutual support between fighting positions. More concerning was evidence of electronic warfare capabilities that could potentially compromise their communications and reveal their position to opposing forces. Martinez's technical analysis indicated that their radios were being monitored by sophisticated intercept equipment that could triangulate transmission sources if they maintained communications for extended periods. This discovery forced Emma to modify their information-gathering approach, relying more heavily on visual observation and less on electronic intelligence that might compromise their position. Connor's team identified several key defensive positions that weren't immediately obvious from their initial vantage point, demonstrating the value of multiple observation posts and extended surveillance time. However, Connor's desire to get closer to targets for more detailed analysis created ongoing tension about acceptable risk levels for information gathering. The situation became critical when Jake's team detected an approaching patrol that threatened to discover their position. The opposing force consisted of 4 advanced students who moved with the confidence of people thoroughly familiar with the terrain and trained in counter-reconnaissance techniques. Their route would bring them within yards of Jake and Martinez's concealed position unless the team took immediate action. Emma faced a complex decision, with significant implications for mission success and team safety. Attempting to evade the patrol might compromise their intelligence gathering and force them to return with incomplete information. Allowing discovery would result in mission failure and potentially dangerous confrontation with well-trained opponents. Trying to eliminate or neutralize the patrol exceeded their mission parameters and would likely result in automatic failure for unnecessary escalation. She chose a 4th option that demonstrated the creative problem-solving approach she had developed throughout her military career. Rather than treating the approaching patrol as a threat to be avoided or confronted, she decided to use their presence as additional intelligence-gathering opportunity while simultaneously creating conditions for successful evasion. Emma directed Connor's team to carefully document the patrol's equipment, procedures, and communication methods while Jake's team prepared for silent withdrawal from their position. The key was timing the observation and movement phases to maximize intelligence value while avoiding detection through careful coordination between elements. The plan required precise execution under significant stress, with any mistake potentially resulting in mission failure and confrontation with superior forces. Emma coordinated the complex maneuver through carefully timed hand signals and minimal radio communication, demonstrating leadership capabilities that integrated tactical knowledge with practical understanding of human performance under pressure. Connor's team successfully gathered detailed intelligence about patrol procedures and equipment, while Jake's team executed a flawless withdrawal that avoided detection despite the patrol passing within 10 feet of their former position. The coordinated effort provided comprehensive information about both defensive positions and mobile security elements while maintaining mission security. The return movement proceeded without significant incident, though growing fatigue began affecting individual performance as sleep deprivation and physical stress accumulated. Emma modified their route to account for decreased alertness and reaction times, understanding that leadership under extreme conditions required constant adaptation to changing human factors as well as tactical considerations. They reached the extraction point with complete intelligence and no compromise of their position, a result that stood out among generally mixed performance across the class during similar exercises. More significantly, Emma had demonstrated leadership methods that maximized team capabilities while maintaining mission focus under complex and stressful conditions. The after-action review conducted by Sergeant Carter focused on tactical decision-making and leadership effectiveness under realistic combat conditions. His evaluation covered technical aspects of reconnaissance procedures and navigation accuracy, but emphasized the leadership challenges associated with coordinating multiple personalities and capabilities under stress. Effective reconnaissance requires balancing information gathering against security considerations, Carter noted, addressing the entire class after individual team evaluations. Real combat situations rarely provide perfect conditions or unlimited time for intelligence collection. Leaders must make decisions based on incomplete information while managing human factors that affect team performance. Emma's leadership during the exercise received recognition for creative problem-solving and effective team coordination, though Carter's feedback emphasized areas for improvement in tactical communication and risk assessment. His evaluation suggested that her unconventional background provided advantages in complex problem-solving but required development in traditional military decision-making processes. Connor's performance evaluation highlighted his outstanding individual capabilities while noting concerns about his response to leadership by others and tendency to prioritize speed over security considerations. Carter's feedback suggested that Connor's leadership potential was significant, but required better understanding of collaborative decision-making and risk management. The exercise results affected team dynamics in subtle but important ways. Emma's successful leadership demonstration earned grudging respect from candidates who had previously questioned her suitability for the program. Connor's mixed evaluation, despite his obvious physical capabilities, highlighted the reality that Ranger School evaluated leadership potential rather than simply physical performance. Jake's contributions to mission success reinforced his growing reputation as a reliable team member whose quiet competence proved valuable in high-stress situations. His navigation expertise and steady performance under pressure made him a preferred partner for many candidates during subsequent exercises. The week's training progression included increasingly complex scenarios designed to test leadership capabilities under various conditions and stress levels. Urban operations exercises conducted in mock village environments tested decision-making, when civilian considerations complicated tactical situations. Night operations pushed navigation and coordination skills to their limits, when visibility and communication became severely restricted. Emma found herself adapting leadership approaches to different environmental and mission requirements, developing flexibility that would prove crucial in later phases of the program. Each exercise revealed new aspects of the challenge she faced, requiring constant learning and adaptation to maintain performance standards while helping others achieve their potential. Her engineering background proved particularly valuable during problem-solving exercises that required creative solutions to complex tactical challenges. When standard procedures proved inadequate for specific situations, Emma's systematic approach to analyzing problems and developing alternative solutions provided advantages that compensated for her physical limitations in strength-dependent tasks. The program's psychological pressure intensified as candidates realized that individual performance directly affected their teammates' success or failure. Leadership positions created responsibility for others' achievements and safety, adding emotional stress to the existing physical and mental demands. Some candidates thrived under this additional pressure, while others began showing signs of breakdown as the weight of responsibility exceeded their coping capabilities. Emma discovered that her natural tendency to support struggling teammates created both advantages and risks in the competitive environment of Ranger School. Helping others succeed demonstrated leadership qualities that instructors valued, but could also result in neglecting her own performance requirements if not carefully managed. The relationship between candidates became increasingly complex as stress revealed authentic personality traits that might have remained hidden under normal circumstances. Some individuals became more supportive and collaborative when faced with extreme challenges, recognizing that mutual success required team effort. Others became more competitive and self-focused, viewing teammate struggles as opportunities for relative advancement. Connor's attitude toward Emma evolved during this period, shifting from open skepticism to grudging recognition of her capabilities, while maintaining underlying resistance to accepting her as an equal. His comments became less directly critical but retained subtle implications that her success somehow diminished the program's standards or traditional values. "I have to admit you've got problem-solving skills," he acknowledged after a particularly challenging urban operations exercise where Emma's leadership had resulted in mission success despite complex tactical challenges. But this program isn't really about finding creative solutions to academic problems. It's about preparing leaders for life-and-death combat situations where people need to trust their commanders completely. Emma understood the deeper implications of Connor's statement, recognizing that his concerns reflected broader questions about leadership credibility and unit cohesion in elite military organizations. These weren't necessarily personal attacks, but legitimate professional concerns about how non-traditional leaders would function in actual combat environments. Jake's perspective provided important counterbalance to Connor's skepticism, offering insights from someone whose infantry background gave him credibility on tactical matters, while his quiet observation revealed truths that more vocal personalities sometimes missed. "Leadership isn't about fitting a specific profile," Jake observed during one of their evening discussions. "It's about making good decisions and helping people execute them effectively. Some of the best officers I've worked with didn't look like what you'd expect from action movies, but they understood their people and made smart choices under pressure." These conversations helped Emma develop more sophisticated understanding of the leadership challenges she would face throughout her military career, extending far beyond the immediate requirements of Ranger School. The program was revealing complex dynamics between traditional military culture and evolving requirements for effective leadership in modern combat environments. The physical demands continued escalating as training progressed into more advanced phases. Ruck marches extended beyond 15 miles with increasingly heavy loads designed to test endurance limits while simulating the equipment requirements of extended combat operations. Obstacle courses incorporated time pressures and team coordination requirements that pushed individual capabilities while demanding effective collaboration. Emma's approach to these challenges remained systematic and methodical, analyzing each requirement to identify the most efficient techniques for her physical constraints, while developing strategies that could help teammates maximize their own performance. Her engineering mindset proved valuable for understanding the biomechanics and physics involved in various tasks, allowing her to develop methods that optimized energy expenditure and minimized injury risk. The sleep deprivation component of training reached levels that significantly impaired normal cognitive function, creating conditions where decision-making and problem-solving abilities deteriorated dramatically. Candidates found themselves struggling with basic tasks that would normally be routine, while complex leadership challenges became exponentially more difficult when mental clarity was compromised by exhaustion. Emma discovered that her systematic approach to problem-solving provided some protection against the cognitive impairment caused by sleep deprivation. By developing standardized procedures for common tasks and decision-making frameworks for typical leadership scenarios, she could maintain acceptable performance even when exhaustion made creative thinking nearly impossible. This methodical preparation proved particularly valuable during night operations when darkness and fatigue combined to create extremely challenging conditions. While other candidates struggled with navigation and tactical decision-making under these degraded circumstances, Emma's pre-planned procedures allowed her to maintain effectiveness despite significant cognitive impairment. The program's medical monitoring became more intensive as physical stress accumulated and injury rates increased among candidates pushing their bodies beyond normal limits. Daily medical checks identified developing problems before they became serious enough to require elimination from training, but also created additional pressure as candidates worried about appearing weak or asking for help when they should be demonstrating resilience. Emma's smaller frame paradoxically provided some advantages in managing the physical stress of extended training. Her lower body weight reduced the load on joints and connective tissue during long ruck marches, while her efficient movement patterns minimized energy expenditure compared to larger candidates who relied more heavily on raw strength. However, she remained vulnerable to injury from equipment loads that represented larger percentages of her total body weight. The program's competitive atmosphere intensified as candidates realized that evaluation was comparative rather than absolute. Meeting minimum standards wasn't sufficient for success if other candidates performed significantly better in similar circumstances. This reality created pressure for continuous improvement and maximum effort that pushed everyone beyond their perceived limitations. Emma understood that her unconventional background created additional pressure to exceed rather than simply meet standard expectations. Any performance that could be interpreted as marginal would likely be viewed as evidence that she didn't belong in the program, requiring her to maintain consistently exceptional results to avoid elimination. The psychological preparation became as important as physical conditioning as training progressed toward more advanced phases. Candidates needed mental frameworks for processing extreme stress and fatigue while maintaining leadership effectiveness and tactical competence. Some individuals developed effective coping strategies naturally, while others required more deliberate development of psychological resilience. Emma's approach emphasized understanding rather than simply enduring the stress factors involved in elite military training. By analyzing the physiological and psychological effects of sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and social pressure, she could develop specific techniques for maintaining performance when normal coping mechanisms became inadequate. Her engineering background provided useful analogies for understanding human performance under extreme conditions. Just as mechanical systems had operating parameters beyond which failure became likely, human beings had stress thresholds that required careful management to maintain functionality. Understanding these limitations allowed for more effective preparation and better decision-making when approaching critical points. The academic components of training became more challenging as sleep deprivation and physical stress impaired normal learning and retention capabilities. Tactical concepts that would normally be straightforward became difficult to grasp when exhaustion compromised cognitive function. Map reading, radio procedures, and mission planning required extra effort to master when mental clarity was severely degraded. Emma's systematic study methods proved valuable for maintaining academic performance, despite the challenging conditions. By developing structured approaches to learning and retention that accounted for impaired cognitive function, she could continue mastering complex material, while other candidates struggled with information overload and retention problems. The instructional staff monitored academic performance as carefully as physical and leadership capabilities, recognizing that tactical competence was essential for effective leadership in combat situations. Candidates who couldn't master the tactical knowledge required for mission planning and execution would be eliminated regardless of their physical capabilities or leadership potential. The program's progression toward more realistic combat scenarios created additional stress, as candidates realized that their decisions would have consequences for teammates' safety and mission success. Leadership positions carried genuine responsibility for others' welfare, adding emotional pressure to the existing physical and mental demands. Emma found herself appointed to increasingly challenging leadership positions, as instructors evaluated her development and potential for advanced responsibilities. Each assignment tested different aspects of leadership capability, while revealing areas that required continued development and improvement. The environment at Fort Benning during this phase of training had transformed from an academic challenge into something approaching actual combat conditions in terms of stress levels and performance requirements. Candidates operated in a state of constant alertness and readiness, understanding that any moment might bring evaluation scenarios that could determine their continued participation in the program. The relationships between candidates had evolved into complex networks of mutual support and professional competition that reflected the realities of elite military units. Trust and cooperation were essential for mission success, but individual performance remained the primary factor in program completion. Emma's position within this dynamic continued evolving as her capabilities became more apparent through successive leadership demonstrations. The initial skepticism about her suitability had given way to recognition of her unique strengths, though questions remained about how those strengths would translate to actual combat leadership. The stage was set for the more advanced phases of training where physical demands would reach their peak while leadership challenges became exponentially more complex. Emma had proven her ability to meet basic requirements, but the ultimate test of carrying her teammate 12 miles to save his life remained ahead, along with the discoveries about systemic problems within the training program that would transform her from student to reformer. The medical evacuation procedures at Fort Benning's Ranger Training Brigade had been refined through decades of managing training injuries that pushed human physiology to its absolute limits. Standard protocols required immediate documentation of any incident involving candidate safety, with detailed reports tracking the nature, severity, and circumstances of every injury that occurred during training exercises. These records served multiple purposes beyond simple medical care, providing data for continuous improvement of training methods and early identification of safety trends that might indicate systemic problems requiring institutional attention. Emma first encountered these procedures during the third week of training, when a routine equipment inspection revealed troubling patterns that should have triggered immediate administrative review. As her squad prepared for an extended field exercise designed to test leadership capabilities under sustained stress, she noticed inconsistencies in the medical evacuation equipment that suggested either poor maintenance protocols or deliberate neglect of safety systems that protected candidates during high-risk training phases. The discovery occurred during pre-mission equipment checks conducted in the supply warehouse adjacent to the main training compound. Each candidate was responsible for inspecting assigned gear to ensure proper function and completeness before deploying to field training areas where equipment failure could have serious consequences. Emma approached these inspections with the systematic methodology her engineering background had ingrained, checking not just obvious functionality but also subtle indicators of wear, damage, or improper maintenance that might predict failure under stress. Her assigned medical kit contained supplies and equipment designed to provide emergency care for common training injuries ranging from dehydration and heat exhaustion to more serious trauma requiring immediate evacuation to proper medical facilities. The kit's contents followed standardized protocols established through extensive analysis of injury patterns and treatment requirements specific to elite military training environments. However, Emma's detailed inspection revealed several items that showed evidence of expiration, contamination, or mechanical failure that rendered them potentially dangerous rather than helpful in emergency situations. IV fluids bore dates indicating expiration over 6 months earlier, while sterile bandages showed packaging damage that compromised their sterility. More concerning was the condition of the emergency radio designated for medical evacuations, which displayed corrosion in battery compartments and loose connections that suggested extended neglect. She initially assumed these problems represented isolated incidents involving individual equipment sets that had somehow escaped normal quality control procedures. Military logistics systems were complex and occasionally allowed defective items to reach end users, despite multiple inspection checkpoints designed to prevent such occurrences. Emma documented the problems and requested replacement items from the supply staff, expecting routine resolution of what appeared to be standard administrative issues. The response from supply personnel proved more troubling than the original equipment problems. Sergeant Rodriguez, the NCO responsible for medical supply management, seemed surprised by Emma's detailed inspection findings and uncomfortable with her requests for replacement items. His initial reaction suggested that candidates rarely conducted such thorough equipment checks, and that her discovery of expired and damaged supplies represented an unusual situation requiring explanation to higher-level supervisors. Most candidates don't go through their med kits with engineering precision, Sergeant Rodriguez commented while reviewing Emma's documentation. These supplies are rotated regularly according to standard procedures. If there are problems, they must have occurred during recent handling or transport. Emma accepted this explanation while noting the defensive tone that suggested systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. Her military experience had taught her to recognize the difference between genuine surprise at discovering problems and discomfort at having problems exposed that were already known but not addressed. Sergeant Rodriguez's reaction fell clearly into the latter category. She decided to conduct informal inspections of medical equipment assigned to other candidates, using casual conversations during equipment preparation to gather information about the condition and functionality of supplies distributed throughout the training program. These discussions needed to appear routine rather than investigative to avoid alerting staff members who might view detailed scrutiny as problematic for unstated reasons. Jake Thompson proved particularly cooperative in these informal surveys, sharing Emma's concern about equipment reliability and willing to examine his own supplies with greater attention to detail than normally required. His medical kit revealed similar problems with expired medications and damaged packaging, though not quite as extensive as the issues Emma had discovered in her own equipment. "I never thought to check expiration dates on this stuff," Jake admitted while examining IV fluid bags that showed manufacturing dates over 8 months old. "In infantry units, the medics handle all this detail work. I assumed Ranger School would have the same level of professional medical support." Connor Mitchell's response to Emma's inquiries proved more resistant and revealing. When she casually mentioned the equipment problems she had discovered, his reaction suggested awareness of broader issues that he preferred not to discuss openly. His initial dismissiveness quickly gave way to obvious discomfort when she pressed for details about his own equipment condition. "Look, this isn't the regular army where everything's perfect and everyone follows regulations to the letter," Connor said, his tone suggesting frustration with what he perceived as unrealistic expectations. "Ranger School is supposed to push people beyond normal limits. That includes dealing with less than ideal conditions and equipment that might not meet peacetime standards." Emma found Connor's rationalization disturbing for several reasons. Elite military training programs typically maintained higher equipment standards rather than lower ones, recognizing that extreme physical and mental stress increased rather than decreased the likelihood of equipment-dependent emergencies. More concerning was his apparent acceptance of substandard safety equipment as somehow appropriate for advanced training rather than evidence of institutional problems requiring correction. She began paying closer attention to medical procedures and safety protocols during subsequent training exercises, watching for additional indicators of systemic neglect or deliberate corner-cutting that might compromise candidate safety. Her observations revealed patterns that went beyond simple equipment maintenance issues, suggesting more fundamental problems with safety culture and risk management within the training program. During a particularly challenging night navigation exercise, Emma witnessed an incident that highlighted the potentially serious consequences of inadequate medical support capabilities. Candidate Williams suffered severe dehydration and heat exhaustion during a forced march conducted in unusually hot weather conditions that pushed environmental stress beyond normal training parameters. The medical response to Williams' condition revealed troubling gaps in emergency procedures and equipment readiness. The instructor's initial assessment suggested serious heat-related illness requiring immediate cooling and IV fluid replacement, but the available medical supplies proved inadequate for providing proper treatment. The expired IV fluids Emma had identified earlier were apparently representative of broader supply problems affecting emergency medical response throughout the training program. More concerning was the delay in requesting evacuation support while instructors attempted to treat Williams' condition with inadequate supplies and equipment. Standard military medical protocols emphasized rapid evacuation for heat-related emergencies that didn't respond immediately to field treatment, but the training program's procedures seemed to prioritize maintaining exercise continuity over optimal medical care. Williams eventually recovered after extended field treatment and delayed evacuation to proper medical facilities, but the incident demonstrated dangerous gaps between stated safety procedures and actual emergency response capabilities. Emma documented her observations carefully while maintaining outward compliance with program requirements, understanding that raising concerns prematurely might result in her elimination rather than correction of systemic problems. The pattern of medical supply problems extended beyond individual equipment, sets to encompass broader issues with inventory management and quality control throughout the training program. Emma's informal surveys revealed that expired medications, damaged equipment, and inadequate supplies were common across multiple classes and training phases rather than isolated incidents affecting only recent arrivals. These discoveries suggested either systematic neglect of safety procedures or deliberate cost-cutting measures that compromised candidate welfare in favor of budget considerations. Both possibilities indicated institutional problems requiring investigation by authorities with sufficient rank and independence to override local command resistance to external scrutiny. Emma's engineering background helped her understand the statistical implications of the safety problems she was documenting. Individual equipment failures might occur randomly without indicating broader issues, but the patterns she observed suggested systematic causation requiring institutional rather than individual solutions. The frequency and distribution of problems exceeded what would be expected from normal variation in supply chain performance. She began developing a comprehensive analysis of safety deficiencies that could support formal complaints if other resolution methods proved inadequate. This documentation required careful collection of evidence that would withstand scrutiny from investigating authorities while protecting her position within the training program during the investigation process. The academic portions of medical training provided additional insights into the gaps between stated procedures and actual capabilities within the program. Classroom instruction emphasized advanced trauma care and emergency medical procedures that required specific equipment and supplies for effective implementation, but the field exercises consistently involved scenarios where such equipment was either unavailable or non-functional. Instructors seemed aware of these discrepancies but presented them as intentional training challenges designed to teach improvisation and adaptation under adverse conditions. However, Emma's analysis suggested that many situations involve genuine equipment deficiencies rather than planned training scenarios, creating unnecessary risks that exceeded appropriate training objectives. The psychological pressure of elite military training made it difficult for candidates to distinguish between legitimate challenges designed to test their capabilities and illegitimate safety compromises that exposed them to unnecessary risks. The program's culture emphasized acceptance of extreme conditions and discouraged complaints that might be interpreted as lack of resilience or commitment to military service. Emma realized that her unique position as someone with both technical expertise and outsider perspective made her particularly well-suited to identify problems that others might miss or dismiss as normal. Her engineering background provided analytical tools for assessing safety systems, while her relative newcomer status to infantry culture made her less likely to accept dangerous conditions as traditional or necessary. The relationships between candidates created additional complexity for addressing safety concerns within the existing command structure. Any formal complaint about training conditions would likely be viewed as evidence of unsuitability for elite military service, rather than legitimate concern about institutional problems. The program's selection process explicitly sought individuals who could endure extreme conditions without complaint, making safety advocacy potentially counterproductive for individual advancement. Jake Thompson proved to be an invaluable ally in documenting safety problems, his infantry background providing credibility that complemented Emma's technical analysis. His willingness to examine issues objectively, rather than dismissing them as normal training challenges, helped validate Emma's concerns while providing additional perspective from someone with extensive experience in conventional military units. "This isn't normal, even by infantry standards," Jake confided after reviewing Emma's documentation of medical supply problems. "Combat units take medical readiness seriously because lives depend on it. What we're seeing here looks more like cost-cutting or negligence than legitimate training conditions." Connor Mitchell's attitude toward safety concerns remained consistently dismissive, apparently viewing any questioning of training conditions as evidence of weakness or unsuitability for elite military service. His position reflected broader cultural attitudes within special operations communities that sometimes prioritize toughness over prudent risk management. "Ranger school is supposed to be hard," Connor insisted when Emma attempted to discuss her findings with their training group. "If you can't handle dealing with less than perfect equipment in challenging conditions, maybe you should reconsider whether this program is right for you." Emma understood that Connor's perspective reflected genuine philosophical differences about training methods and safety standards, rather than simple resistance to criticism. Some military leaders believed that exposing candidates to equipment failures and suboptimal conditions during training better prepared them for combat situations where perfect support might not be available. However, Emma's analysis indicated that the problems she was documenting exceeded reasonable training challenges and created risks that weren't justified by educational objectives. Expired medications and non-functional emergency equipment couldn't teach useful lessons about improvisation because they represented failures of institutional support rather than realistic combat conditions. The medical staff assigned to the training program seemed aware of supply and equipment problems, but appeared constrained in their ability to address systemic issues that exceeded their administrative authority. The military medical officers responsible for candidate safety operated within command structures that prioritized training objectives over optimal medical support, creating institutional conflicts between safety and mission accomplishment. Dr. Sarah Chen, the primary medical officer supporting the Ranger program, proved sympathetic to Emma's concerns during a routine medical evaluation that provided opportunity for private discussion. Her professional medical training emphasized patient safety and quality care that sometimes conflicted with training objectives that pushed candidates beyond normal physiological limits. "We work within constraints that don't always align with optimal medical practice," Dr. Chen admitted carefully during their conversation. "The program's mission requires accepting certain risks that wouldn't be appropriate in other contexts. However, some of the equipment and supply issues you've identified exceed reasonable training necessities." Dr. Chen's acknowledgement validated Emma's concerns while highlighting the institutional pressures that prevented medical staff from advocating more aggressively for improved safety standards. Military medical officers served within command structures that could override their professional medical judgment when training objectives were deemed more important than optimal safety measures. Emma realized that addressing the safety problem she had identified would require working outside normal command channels to reach authorities with sufficient independence and authority to investigate institutional issues. Internal complaints would likely be dismissed or suppressed by local commanders who viewed safety advocacy as interference with training objectives. The pattern of problems extended beyond medical supplies to encompass other safety-critical equipment, including communications gear, navigation instruments, and protective equipment used during high-risk training exercises. Emma's systematic examination revealed maintenance deficiencies and functionality problems that suggested broader neglect of safety systems throughout the training program. Radio equipment showed similar patterns of poor maintenance and functionality problems that could compromise emergency communications when candidates required evacuation or assistance during field exercises. Navigation instruments displayed calibration errors and mechanical problems that could lead to serious incidents if candidates became lost during solo navigation exercises in challenging terrain. The protective equipment used during combat training exercises revealed particularly concerning problems, including damaged helmets, worn body armor, and safety harnesses with frayed connections that could fail during rappelling or other high-risk activities. These deficiencies created unnecessary risks that went far beyond reasonable training challenges and suggested systematic neglect of candidate safety. Emma's documentation efforts required balancing thoroughness with discretion to avoid alerting program staff to her investigation before she could present findings to appropriate authorities. Her position as a candidate rather than an inspector limited her access to official maintenance records and supply documentation that would provide definitive evidence of institutional problems. The psychological stress of documenting safety problems while maintaining performance standards as a candidate created additional challenges that required careful management. Emma needed to continue excelling in training exercises while conducting what amounted to an unofficial safety investigation that could result in her elimination if discovered prematurely. Her dual focus required exceptional time management and energy allocation during periods when sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion already pushed cognitive capabilities to their limits. The additional mental workload of safety analysis competed with the concentration required for tactical training and leadership development that represented her primary objectives within the program. The moral dimensions of the situation created further complexity, as Emma grappled with conflicting loyalties between program completion and safety advocacy. Her personal success in Ranger School would validate the possibility that non-traditional candidates could excel in elite military training, but achieving that success while ignoring safety problems that endangered other candidates raised serious ethical questions. Jake Thompson's perspective helped Emma work through these moral complexities, providing insights from someone who shared her concerns about safety, while understanding the broader implications of challenging institutional authority within military contexts. Sometimes doing the right thing means risking your own advancement, Jake observed during one of their private discussions about the safety problems they had documented. But if we don't speak up about legitimate safety issues, people could get seriously hurt or killed because of negligence that we had the opportunity to address. Emma recognized that Jake's willingness to support safety advocacy, despite potential consequences for his own military career, demonstrated the kind of moral courage that the Ranger program was supposed to develop in its graduates. His infantry background provided credibility that enhanced their combined ability to present safety concerns to higher authorities. The timing of safety advocacy became crucial as training progressed toward more advanced phases involving higher-risk exercises where equipment failures could have increasingly serious consequences. Emma realized that delaying action while gathering additional evidence might allow preventable incidents to occur that could seriously injure or kill candidates whose safety she had the opportunity to protect. The institutional culture surrounding elite military training created powerful pressures against raising safety concerns that might be interpreted as evidence of weakness or unsuitability for demanding military service. Candidates understood that any action that drew negative attention from instructors could result in elimination regardless of their actual performance levels. Emma's position as a non-traditional candidate created additional vulnerability to elimination based on pretextual reasons if her safety advocacy was viewed unfavorably by program leadership. Her continued presence in the program already challenged conventional assumptions about suitable candidates, making her particularly susceptible to discriminatory treatment disguised as objective evaluation. The evidence she had gathered clearly demonstrated systematic safety problems that exceeded reasonable training challenges and created unnecessary risks for all candidates regardless of their backgrounds or capabilities. These problems affected everyone equally and required institutional solutions that went beyond individual adaptation or resilience. Her analysis indicated that the safety deficiencies she had documented represented failures of leadership and institutional responsibility rather than legitimate training conditions. Military leaders had professional obligations to provide appropriate equipment and safety support for personnel under their command, obligations that appeared to be violated by the patterns she had observed. The decision about how and when to present her findings required careful consideration of multiple factors, including personal safety, program integrity, and the welfare of current and future candidates who would be affected by continued institutional neglect of safety requirements. Emma understood that her actions would have consequences extending far beyond her individual situation. The approaching field exercise promised to involve the most challenging and dangerous training scenarios yet encountered, creating urgency about addressing safety problems before they could contribute to serious incidents during high-risk activities. Emma's documentation efforts had revealed systematic problems that made preventable accidents increasingly likely as training intensity escalated. Her engineering background provided frameworks for risk analysis that helped her understand the statistical probabilities of safety incidents given the equipment and procedural deficiencies she had documented. The patterns suggested that serious accidents were not just possible but likely unless institutional changes addressed the underlying causes of safety system failures. The stage was set for the critical decision about whether to risk her own program completion by formally reporting safety concerns or to prioritize personal advancement, while hoping that other candidates wouldn't suffer consequences from the institutional negligence she had discovered. Emma's choice would determine not only her own future, but potentially the safety and lives of fellow candidates who trusted that institutional leaders were providing appropriate protection during extreme training conditions. The stage was set for the critical decision about whether to risk her own program completion by formally reporting safety concerns, or to prioritize personal advancement, while hoping that other candidates wouldn't suffer consequences from the institutional negligence she had discovered. Emma's choice would determine not only her own future, but potentially the safety and lives of fellow candidates who trusted that institutional leaders were providing appropriate protection during extreme training conditions. The final mountain phase exercise would test everything Emma had learned about leadership under extreme conditions, but it would also prove to be the moment when all her documented safety concerns became deadly reality. The 12-mile forced march through Georgia's most challenging terrain was designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limits, while testing their ability to maintain responsibility for teammate welfare under conditions of severe exhaustion and environmental stress. Emma stood at the starting line with Jake Thompson beside her, both carrying the regulation 70-pound rucksacks that felt heavier with each passing hour of sleep deprivation. The predawn air carried an oppressive humidity that promised another scorching day where heat-related injuries would become increasingly likely as physical exhaustion accumulated. Around them, the remaining 18 candidates prepared for what many considered the program's ultimate test of character and endurance. The route ahead stretched through dense pine forests, across multiple creek beds, and over ridgelines that offered no shelter from the brutal Georgia sun. Emma's engineering mind automatically calculated the physiological demands they would face, understanding that dehydration and heat exhaustion would begin affecting performance within the first few hours unless candidates managed their resources with mathematical precision. Jake had been struggling with recurring knee pain for the past week, a developing overuse injury that he had hidden from medical staff to avoid elimination from the program. Emma noticed his subtle favoring of his left leg during morning formation, recognizing the early signs of a condition that could become debilitating under the extreme stress of extended load-bearing movement through difficult terrain. "Your knee's getting worse," she observed quietly as they conducted final equipment checks. "You should get it evaluated before we start moving." Jake shook his head with determination that reflected his absolute commitment to completing the program regardless of personal cost. "I've made it this far. I'm not quitting when we're this close to finishing." His expression carried the kind of stubborn resolve that made excellent soldiers, but sometimes led to dangerous decisions about personal limitations. Emma understood Jake's motivation while recognizing the potential consequences of his choice to continue training with a developing injury. Her systematic documentation of safety deficiencies had revealed that emergency medical support would be inadequate if serious problems developed during the march, making prevention of medical emergencies crucial for candidate survival. Sergeant Carter's final briefing emphasized the individual nature of the challenge while maintaining the facade that appropriate safety support would be available if needed. His words carried the authority of decades of experience leading similar exercises, but Emma's investigation had revealed the gaps between his assurances and actual emergency response capabilities. This march will test your personal limits and your commitment to mission accomplishment under the most demanding conditions we can create, Carter announced to the formation. You will complete this movement as individuals, but you remain responsible for the welfare of fellow candidates who may require assistance during the exercise. Emma listened to Carter's instructions while mentally reviewing the equipment failures and procedural breakdowns she had documented throughout the program. The combination of Jake's developing injury, inadequate medical support, and her knowledge of systematic safety deficiencies created a scenario where disaster seemed increasingly probable rather than merely possible. The first 6 miles proceeded without major incident, though Emma monitored Jake's condition carefully as his knee pain gradually worsened with continued load-bearing stress. His military discipline prevented him from complaining or requesting assistance, but his increasing stiffness and altered gait revealed progressive deterioration that would eventually become unsustainable. The terrain they crossed included several stream crossings where candidates struggled with heavy loads while navigating swift-moving water that had risen above planned levels due to recent rainfall. Emma used these natural rest stops to assess Jake's condition while maintaining the appearance of routine hydration and equipment checks. The pain's manageable, Jake insisted when Emma expressed concern about his obviously worsening mobility. I can push through it for another 6 miles. His determination was admirable, but potentially dangerous given the challenging terrain ahead and the inadequate medical support available if his condition deteriorated beyond his ability to continue independently. The 7th mile brought them into more difficult terrain where the combination of steep grades, loose footing, and heavy equipment loads created maximum stress on knees and ankles already compromised by weeks of intensive training. Emma watched Jake's movement become increasingly labored as his injury progressed from painful to potentially debilitating. By the 8th mile, Jake's condition had deteriorated to the point where he could barely maintain forward movement, despite his extraordinary determination to complete the exercise. His face showed the pallor and muscle tension associated with severe pain, while his movement had become so compromised that he was falling behind the minimum pace required for successful completion. Emma faced the defining moment of her Ranger School experience, and perhaps her entire military career. She could continue at her own pace and complete the march successfully, earning the Ranger tab that would validate her place among the military's elite. Or she could sacrifice her own advancement to help a teammate whose deteriorating condition had been caused partly by the institutional negligence she had documented but been unable to prevent. The decision required no deliberation. Emma immediately moved to Jake's side and began redistributing equipment from his rucksack to her own, adding significant weight to her load while providing him with relief that might make continued movement possible. Her action violated the individual nature of the exercise, but reflected the deeper values about mutual support and shared responsibility that Ranger training was supposed to instill. You don't have to do this, Jake protested weakly as Emma shouldered additional equipment that brought her total load to nearly 90 pounds. This exercise is about individual achievement. Helping me will compromise your own chances. Emma secured the additional equipment while calculating the biomechanical adjustments needed to maintain effective movement with the increased load. Her engineering background helped her optimize weight distribution and movement efficiency, but the additional burden would require significant modifications to her planned pace and energy management strategy. Individual achievement doesn't mean anything if we abandon teammates when they need help, Emma replied while adjusting her rucksack straps to accommodate the additional weight. We're supposed to be learning leadership under stress. This is what real leadership looks like. The next 2 miles tested Emma's physical capabilities beyond anything she had previously experienced. Carrying nearly 90 pounds through increasingly difficult terrain while monitoring Jake's condition and maintaining minimum pace requirements pushed her cardiovascular and muscular systems to their absolute limits.